Okay.
Hold on.
I'm not there yet.
Sorry. Nearly there. Okay. And we're live.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first London Travel Watch virtual public meeting. So we're glad to have the board here and members of staff and I'm sure members of the public as well. So we'll run through the agenda. We've got an interesting guest today, Mark Evers, who will be from Transport for London, who'll be talking through the latest information on the return to work and how services are operating. So Mark will join us at 11:15. I just wanted to start the meeting really on a serious note, a very somber note really. I'd just like, on behalf of London Travel Watch, to thank all the London transport workers, both London and around London, for all the work they've done over the last few months. These men and women have kept transport services going throughout the pandemic. It's been a really, really tough time. They've been ensuring that essential workers get to hospitals, get to care homes, get to construction sites and other key places of work. And that's been really difficult over the last few months. And this has come at real personal risk to members of staff and a sacrifice. And more than 40 Transport for London frontline staff have died from the virus, and others working for Network Rail and other operators also. And clearly a number of other people have caught the virus and have been seriously ill. So I want to record our admiration for the efforts made by all these dedicated people over the last 3 months. London really couldn't have kept going without them, and we really do depend on their dedication. So thank you. So I wanted to move on from that to talk about some of the chair's activities. It has been a very strange time, obviously, for all of you in the last few months. And clearly there's been no meetings directly with anybody, but with Emma and others, we have been able to keep up a virtual meeting schedule. And in fact, it's probably been more packed than ever in many ways, because people can make a meeting for half an hour on Zoom or whatever, which they couldn't necessarily get to in person. So I know Emma has been extremely busy with meetings. I had a very useful meeting last week with Anthony and Emma, with Alison Moore, who's the new chair of the London Assembly Transport Committee. We had a lot of discussion about some of the ongoing issues. There's a real interest in what we're doing, I think, within the Transport Committee, and particularly how we can build up evidence that can support either a scrutiny that they're undertaking at the Assembly, or particularly for our own work to develop key information that nobody else has. And I think definitely working with Transport Focus, we've got opportunities to make use of data. Moving beyond that, we've certainly had a lot of work with the Omnibus survey that Transport Focus have been carrying out every week. I think we've had 4 of those now. And that again is starting to give a trend of what people are thinking about wearing masks, what their attitude is to returning to work, etc. And that's going to continue certainly for the rest of this year, and I think into next year as well, because this is clearly going to be a long-term issue, and we need to develop the evidence. And nobody else has that base, that sample size to get the information from. So I think that's going to be very useful to us going forward. So that's really all I wanted to say in terms of my own work. And so there's been a lot of internal work, a lot of discussion with Emma, and I know we'll have a discussion further on. There's been a huge amount done behind the scenes and indeed on the website in asking questions, finding out what people really want to know, and raising people's expectations, or managing people's expectations perhaps, in terms of what is the public transport going to be like when people return to work. So but we'll talk about that, and I'm sure when Mark Evers is with us there'll be plenty of discussion time around that. So I do apologise to start with. I should have raised the apologies for absence, and Sophia unfortunately has been ill and isn't able to join us today. So we have apologies from her. Can I just check if there are any declarations of interest for today's meeting from board members?
Chair, as you're aware, I do have a standard declaration of being chair of Transport for All, but I just wanted to remind you, given that there are a number of items on the agenda today, about working with Transport for All.
Okay, thank you, Alan. No, that's useful because I know we've got several issues that, that will be discussed. So thank you for that. And nothing else? Okay. Can we just move on then to the minutes of our last meeting back in April, the board meeting, the 23rd of April. Can I just check if anybody has any amendments to those minutes or wants to raise any particular issue around those? No. Jackie?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself and raise my hand at the same time. I can't multitask.
Okay.
It was on page 4 of 7, Arthur, in the paragraph, the third paragraph down, basically, talking about partnering up with organisations. And I mean, it's actually quoting me, these Delphic minutes that talk about he and she, and you have to work out which of us it is. But and it says we shouldn't partner up with organisations simply because members of the board work with or have some association. I think what I was actually trying to say, and obviously failed, was it shouldn't look as though that's the reason for it. So my concern was about making sure we get the governance correct, and that we properly justify the partnerships that we have.
Okay, well that's helpful, Jackie. So perhaps we can just amend that slightly, Luke, just to make that clear. It's the perception perhaps of how this might be seen. So we can amend that, Jackie.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Nothing else? Okay. All right, well, thanks for that. And thanks for doing those minutes, Luke. That's very helpful. I don't quite know how formally we sign remotely. Do I need to scan something through to you, or when they're the final version?
I'll keep a hard copy, and when we eventually meet up again, I'll have a lot for you to sign.
Okay, well, I hope it won't be some yellowing piece of paper by then, but okay, that's fine. I'll sign when we next have the chance to meet. Right, thank you for that. Now, a very brief paper we have on matters arising. I think there was only one, and that's ongoing, isn't it? So I don't think there's anything further to say. Is there, Emma, on that, or do you want to say a bit more?
No, I don't have anything to add, Arthur.
Okay. And board members have, I think, had an invitation, or we tried to set up a meeting with Transport Focus to look at the risk register. I think a date is still being set for that, so we're still waiting for that to happen. But as soon as it can, it would be great to have several of you on that, just to discuss what the risks are, particularly for us. But it makes sense, obviously, to have a risk register that tallies with Transport Focus. I think that's going to be an important piece of work going forward. Okay. Right. And I think then if we could perhaps move around very slightly and perhaps go to Richard and to look at the impact of our influencing activity report, as we've got a little bit of space before Mark joins us. So Richard, do you want to talk through your report? Richard, you're just on mute at the moment.
Apologies. Yeah, I know time is short, so I'll assume you've read the report as usual. It's slightly shorter than normal. because we haven't had a whole quarter's worth of information yet. But yeah, quite a few impacts. We've made quite a few successes the last 2 months, continuing the work we've been doing to support passengers through the coronavirus pandemic. Some notable successes. We managed to get train companies and TfL to respond very quickly to some questions that we asked to ensure that passengers could travel safely and maintain social distancing. So we got some very quick answers there. On refunds for Eurostar passengers, in terms of they actually get a cash refund rather than vouchers that they'd previously only been offered by the company. I'll move just very briefly on to, we had some very good other media coverage in terms of a few interviews. Emma did a few interviews for the BBC London News on the TfL bailout and on what passengers could expect as the lockdown sort of eases and people start coming back to work. We got some coverage in the national press, Daily Express as well, and Daily Mail. So some good national coverage there as well as the Standard. Need to mention, I suppose, our very successful emerging from lockdown seminar that we held on the 6th of May. Seems a long time ago, but we had a very large number of people who've watched the on-demand footage, in addition to several hundred people on the day watching live with us, and we've managed to get some good speakers, including the Deputy Mayor for Transport. Our website continues to be useful to users, I think, with our website providing information on refunds and compensation and information generally about the coronavirus. The number of visits to our website has gone down, but then obviously transport usage has gone down. But we can certainly say that what people have been looking at on our site, it does correspond to the sort of, I'll just answer a lot of the questions that people have, and people returning to work as well. And we've produced a guide to what people what they could expect as services start to sort of ramp up. So that's a brief sort of journey through the report. Any questions you've got? Yeah, I can answer.
Okay, thanks, Richard, for that. I know there has been a lot going on, and I think definitely through the website we're seeing a lot of activity. So I think it's great, and is very much customer focused, and I think in setting expectation, it's been really helpful. But any particular questions on Richard's paper? Laura.
Thanks, Arthur, and thanks for the report, Richard. Just a quick one on the guide that you mentioned about returning to work. Has it been popular? Has people been making use of it over the last few weeks?
We've had a lot of impressions on Twitter. People have been picking up, people have been sharing it, and we've been updating it. So we did it, the first one for the beginning of June, first ramp up. Then we updated it a few days ago, and it's been shared a lot. Still continuing to get hits on it. So yeah, when I round up all the sort of web stats and social media stats at the end of the quarter, I'll give you all the details of how many people have looked at it.
Thanks very much.
So any other particular thoughts on from the paper? So I just wondered one thing, Richard, if as we move this forward and we're looking into the future, we don't know how long this will go on. Have you got any particular thoughts on areas that we could expand on perhaps and put more time into, or what's your thinking around that?
Well, obviously we're looking at what London Assembly are doing in terms of, we were looking closely at the Transport Committee yesterday, seeing what resonates with them, seeing what passengers feed back to us via Twitter and any other channels we've got, and obviously using the omnibus survey reports that we're doing jointly with Transport Focus. So we'll adapt as we can. We've been very nimble, I think, during this process, and just continue to try and be useful, really, and add to the website where we need to, where we feel where we feel that operators, I mean, we said TfL sometimes haven't been providing all the information we think in one place on their website, where we feel that they're lacking there, we'll try and step in and bridge the gap and signpost people to the information that they need.
Okay.
I think you muted yourself, Arthur.
You, Arthur.
You're still on mute, Arthur. We can't hear you.
Hello, can people hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see me either? Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I've had a bit of a problem with the screen here, so I do apologise for that, but we'll be able to carry on. Does anyone want to add anything to what Richard's been telling us?
Anthony's got a question.
Who's got a question? Sorry, Luke.
Anthony.
Anthony, I'm sorry, Anthony, my screen is blank at the moment, but do carry on and I'll catch up.
Right, thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce the external relations report, as you say, Arthur, we're continuing to do the omnibus survey every week with publication every Friday, and hopefully it's capturing more and more people as weeks go by and more people are starting to use public transport in particular. We're also doing a bit of work with our transport user panel, asking them a bit more in-depth questions about the what they're feeling about returning to travel, etc. And what we've done yesterday for the first time was to do a so-called scrape of social media, which resulted in a blog that we put up yesterday. And I think that was quite useful because it gives a real kind of face and voice to some of the comments. And of course, it's not representative in any way, shape or form at all. And we would never represent it as that. But it does give that ability to hear from people in the front line as to what they're actually saying. And in particular yesterday about the face coverings. So I very much hope that Travelwatch can make use of that facility, because we've now got this ongoing ability to do these social media scrapes, and you can sort of frame the questions in certain ways. So hopefully that will be useful. So yeah, adding all that together, I think the feedback loop should be quite strong over the next few weeks. Thank you.
No, thanks, Anthony, for that. And so I am now back with you properly, so apologies for that. But the discussion we had with Alison Moore at the Transport Committee last week was very much about, you know, how can we use this information to inform both our work, but also the Transport Committee's work in asking the right questions and setting ourselves up for greater success in future. Because I think it is clearly for those people travelling, there'll be a nervousness, and I think unless they're given good information, and that can come from the omnibus survey, what is it that they need to know? Because there's an assumption that everybody knows how to travel in London, and of course they did up to March. They knew exactly how to travel to work and how to make their journeys to friends, whatever. Everything is different now, and I think there's a lot of help that people need, not least to build up their confidence and to get over any fears that they might have. So if we can develop that as quickly as we can, I think, as you say, getting that information, Anthony, I think it's going to be very helpful. Okay. Well, thanks, Richard, for your report then, and thanks for all the work that's going on. It's absolutely needed. We're all being thrown into an area that no one expected to be in. But I think you've developed some really good questions, really good advice that goes out there, and it's all very clear. So I think that's the important thing. Clarity, certainty, consistency, I think is what passengers are desperate for. So so thanks for your work on that.
Thanks, Arthur.
Okay. Right. I think now we're have we got Mark online yet, Luke?
He's still not on the call yet, so he might be, yeah, it might be another 5 minutes or so.
Okay, okay. Susan, I don't want to catch you off guard, but would you be able to just talk through or just put your paper? We can start discussing it. We may have to come back to it after Mark's presented, but would you be able to just talk through? The paper's very clear, I think, in terms of the issues you've been dealing with, but anything you particularly want to say around your paper?
Well, in addition to my paper, I had a look at the stats yesterday to see what was happening, particularly between London Travelwatch and Transport Focus and the cases coming in. At the beginning of lockdown, it was very heavily geared towards London Travelwatch with Eurostar and Transport for London, and that is switching currently. It's more kind of casework heavy geared towards Transport Focus, which is quite interesting. But that's only the last few days, so it'd be quite interesting to see if it just really does chop and change like that, or if I really start to see trends. That's what's happening at the moment. There's a few technical issues going on in the background, but yeah, we're coping. It's okay at the moment. You're on mute again, Arthur.
I apologise for that. I was trying to be good. Yeah, and these issues they will develop over the coming weeks, but it's good that you're spotting them early, I think. And but clearly the refunds issue is something that dominated the first weeks of the lockdown. Are you seeing that now decline a bit in terms of the attention?
Oh yeah, a huge decline. I spoke to Transport for London. I've spoken to a couple of the tops, and they've all reported the massive drop. They said at one point they had we're talking tens and thousands of contacts, and now they're responding to people in real time. Yeah. So it shows how much that's dropped off. Good. We also spoke to Emma and I spoke to Eurostar as well last week. So that was quite a good conversation to see where they were coming from and what's happening with them, because they've extended their refund or their refund for vouchers to the 1st of August from the 1st of July. So it's quite interesting to see when they anticipate coming back.
Yeah, and I think the discussions you've been having with Eurostar have been very productive. Clearly, they've had pressures like everybody in transport and travel, but I think some of the discussions you've been able to have and to arrange some deals really that have worked for passengers and that have been common, just good common sense. I think it's been very good to have those discussions, and these things. We're all learning as we go along, but I think you've been able to get some very good results for passengers, Susan.
Thank you, Arthur.
Any questions on the casework report for Susan? No. Okay. Okay, well, thank you. It is comprehensive, Susan, so we've got plenty of information there, and we will certainly come back to these issues as we move forward. This is not the end of the challenges, so but thanks for all the work you're doing on that. Okay. And Luke, can I just check, is Mark available to join us?
No, he's still not here yet. Hopefully he'll be here within the next 5 minutes. He was scheduled for 1:45. I did ask him to arrive at 10:30, but he might be running a bit late or just sticking to that original time slot.
Okay. Well, we'll take that up as and when Mark joins us. I think it just turning to a couple of the issues that were raised in Susan's report and the work with Transport Focus. Clearly, there's going to be quite a lot of change, and in Susan's work, as you say, you're getting used to dealing with new operators, Susan, and they'll be getting used to your practices. But it seems to me so far that's been working pretty well, and I think you're finding the operators very cooperative in terms of your discussion.
Yeah, they've all been great, very helpful, very happy to engage with us. So
good. Well, we're all learning as we go forward. But now I see we have Mark Evers who's joined us. I don't know, Mark, can you hear us?
I can. Hello.
Hello, Mark, and welcome, and thanks very much for joining us. So I'll introduce Mark. Mark is Chief Customer Officer at Transport for London, and I know, Mark, you've had an incredibly busy period with all your team and staff. We mentioned earlier the amazing work that's been done by TfL staff, frontline staff, and of course behind the scenes, and of course all the transport operators that work in and around London. So there has been an amazing piece of work done over the last 3 months, and I know plenty more to be done. But it'd be great today to hear from you, Mark, just as to where we are now, how you see the future, and how things have been going over the last 3 months. So the floor is yours, and obviously it was a public meeting, and there'll be opportunities for board members to ask you questions afterwards. And if we have questions from the public, we'll try and use those as well.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have a chance to talk to you about some of the things which we have been doing in order to try to manage the transport network over what has been absolutely an unprecedented sort of period. As you said, sort of clearly be good to leave the majority of the time that we have to questions, but I just thought it'd be worthwhile talking you through a little bit around sort of where we are today and a little bit of where we've come from, and then sort of looking to the immediate future. Obviously, given that none of us have a crystal ball and there is still considerable uncertainty about what the future has in store for us, at least where we foresee some of the challenges and areas that we're going to have to concentrate on. As an organisation, we realise that we've got a critical role to play in getting London moving and working again, but we need to do that in a way that maintains sort of safety of the travelling public, but we also need to make sure that we play a part in ensuring that the recovery that happens is a sustainable one as well. And all of the efforts that we've been putting in on both the public transport side of things, encouragement of more walking and cycling, and also management of the road network has been with that sort of aspiration in mind. It's fair to say that the events of the last few months have really flipped the organisation on its head. These are changes which, whilst were sort of foreseen and existed within risk registers somewhere, I think like many businesses, it's one thing to sort of have a risk identified, but when it materialises in this sort of a way, it really does place an organisation under enormous strain. In terms of where we are today, we're getting back to service levels that aren't that far away from normal. That wasn't always the case during the peak of the pandemic and sort of when lockdown was at its most stringent. We weren't able to run as many services. Having said that, we tried to run as many services as possible throughout that period. We typically were running around about 60% of our tube services and around about 80% of the bus services. The reason that we weren't able to run more services during the worst part of the pandemic was simply we were constrained by the number of operational staff that we had available. That was either because they were sick, or they were shielding, or they were in a period of self-isolation, sort of something which probably quite a few of us have been in at one stage or another over the last little while, as sniffles or potentially something more serious sort of came along. Whilst we were in that position, we sort of constructed emergency timetables so that we could protect the majority of the service and keep enough of it running so that we were able to make sure that those essential journeys were happening and ensuring that people that needed to continue to travel were able to do so. Pleased to say that sort of as of yesterday, so to give you a few sort of stats on where we are at the moment, we ran 93% of our scheduled services on London Underground yesterday, a little bit more than that during the peak time in the morning. And for example, the Victoria line yesterday ran a full service, so we were at 36 trains per hour when we were scheduled to do so. On the bus network, we're around about 90% of services, and on overground Docklands Light Railway and TfL rail services, somewhere between 80 and 90% of what we would ordinarily be. Obviously, the capacity side of things is only one part of the equation. The other sort of area is around the level of demand that we're seeing on the network. And that continues to be significantly down, although increasing day by day and week by week. Certainly, again, at the height of the pandemic, we were seeing around about 5% of normal journeys that would have taken place on the tube network taking place. Yesterday, we were 86% down on what we would have been this time last year, but that represents around about sort of a 25-30% increase from where we were this time last week. It's interesting, yesterday was obviously a momentous day as sort of elements of the lockdown were eased. So yesterday we didn't really see that much growth in the peak. Most of that growth came about sort of after sort of 9 o'clock in the morning, and is that sort of inter-peak sort of area, very much linked to the opening up of non-essential retail. Obviously, we'll continue to watch that over the sort of coming days and weeks. Clearly, a lot of speculation amongst transport operators, but obviously amongst sort of the retail sector and others as to whether this is a, people getting out of their homes to from a novelty perspective, or whether or not we will sort of see sustained sort of increases in traffic as a result of the opening up of non-essential retail. On the buses side of things, levels are around about 68% down on what we would ordinarily expect to see. And there's been an increase of between 20 and 25% over the last week as people continue to return to the network. We're seeing more of a sharper peak in the morning on the tube than we are on buses. So buses is a more of a flat profile across the day. Obviously, it does vary route by route, but we're certainly seeing sort of the tube being much more of a peaky sort of demand that's sort of being seen there. And I guess what we've also seen is that the peak of the peak has shifted earlier. So, looking at sometime between sort of 5:45 in the morning and sort of 7, 7:30 being the busiest times on the tube at the moment. Again, sort of speculating, but it would appear that that's probably due to the fact that, as people aren't travelling into offices, which are typically more your 9 to 5, we're seeing more people who are involved in either health services, construction, and other industries that tend to sort of start work earlier in the morning. The busiest lines on the network, again, what we are seeing at the moment is, not all stations are sort of busy, and not all lines are busy at the same times. But what we've seen sort of throughout, and even at the, again, sort of the height of lockdown, there are some parts of the network for very short periods of time that we were still seeing more people travelling than ideally we would have liked at that stage. Typically on the eastern parts of London, places like Stratford, Canning Town, sort of West Ham and others, as sort of people were coming in, often interchanging off some of the national rail services to us. At the moment, the Central line is sort of busy in that morning peak, sort of South Woodford, Redbridge through to Stratford. The Jubilee line is busy as well from sort of Stratford in. District line at the far east of the line as well. And the Victoria line is quite busy, but again, just for a sort of a very short period of time in that sort of morning peak. I guess what we have seen as lockdown has eased is that there haven't been any sort of significant jolts in demand. It has been quite a gradual increase. Having said that, we sort of continue to watch things and have plans in place, and I'll come on to some of those in a little while. Just moving to the road network. At the moment, traffic on the Transport for London road network, so the red routes, is down about 17% compared to a year ago, and is up 5% on last week. I guess what we've sort of seen is that travel on the road network recovered faster than what we sort of were observing and continue to observe on the public transport side of things, although just recently public transport is sort of accelerating and catching up. There's been, again, a lot of sort of talk in the media and sort of amongst transport operators and government around the need to sort of protect against a car-led recovery, certainly in sort of London, and the need to both ensure that we can provide as many safe public transport journeys as possible, but also do as much as we can to encourage more walking and cycling. I guess all of this is predicated on only those people who need to traveling on the network, and for those of us who are able to work from home, like I see all of us doing at the moment, continuing to do so, probably for quite some time to come, sort of where we are. As part of that sort of protection against a sort of a car-led recovery, we saw the reintroduction of the congestion charge and sort of low emission zones sort of in the middle of May. And then sort of from next week, we'll see sort of a temporary increase in the charge, for the congestion charge, that is up to £15, and sort of operational hours sort of increasing, and sort of some changes to the residents discount. Again, that's sort of aimed at reducing traffic in central London and just making sure that we're in a position to support the extra walking and cycling trips that are already important, but I think probably increasingly important as we start to see more people coming back to central London and potentially, you know, looking to continue their journeys from rail hubs to offices, to retail locations and other places on foot and cycling. So it's something which we sort of very keen to continue to promote. Alongside all of that, we're doing other things across the network to promote active travel at sort of, I think it's sort of slightly in excess of 1,000 different traffic signals. We've increased the green man time to try to give more time to pedestrians to sort of move about the city. And the Mayor and TfL have sort of published a street space plan, which hopefully you've sort of seen, which puts sustainable travel very much at the heart of what we're trying to do to support London's recovery. And there are a number of interventions happening all across the city to, again, provide more space to walking and cycling, and working very closely with local authorities on schemes that are happening within their areas as well. Where shall we go to next? Yes, also might be worthwhile at that stage just making a quick note around Santander Cycles. May saw the busiest month on record for Santander Cycles, perhaps not that surprising. Yesterday we saw almost 38,000 hires on Santander, which is up about 35% on the same day last year. So, you know, significant step change there. So that's sort of where we, sort of a bit of a snapshot of where we are at the moment. Just talk a little bit about sort of where we think we might be going to next, and then obviously stop and sort of take questions. I guess people are talking a lot about this new normal. I'm not sure if I like the phrase new normal or not, but clearly it's going to be different. And people who are returning to the transport network should not be expecting to return to a network that was exactly the way that it was before they started to work from home for a significant period of time. I guess quite significantly, yesterday we saw the introduction of mandatory face coverings when travelling on public transport. Observations for yesterday, pretty good. We were seeing sort of between 80 and 90% of people wearing face coverings. So quite a sort of a step change in terms of the level of compliance we were sort of seeing. And again, it was different depending upon tube and bus users. It was different depending upon which part of London that you were in, but we were sort of seeing around about 50% of people wearing face coverings up until sort of the end of last week. So a step change on to sort of 80 to 90% is encouraging, and obviously we, alongside other transport operators, the British Transport Police, will be doing all that we can to encourage people to wear face coverings. Sort of certainly the initial focus being upon encouragement. You know, there are provisions within sort of bylaws to sort of move towards either refusal of travel or fines if that is required, but absolutely we anticipate that the vast majority of customers will wear face coverings. Also worthwhile noting at this stage that we do recognise that some people won't be able to, and we're doing a lot to work with our staff and to provide information through a variety of channels, just to make it clear that for those that can't wear face coverings, that we appreciate that, and that you know, certainly that will be accommodated within the transport network as well. As to how long that's required for, who knows? You know, clearly for quite some time, I think we expect to see face coverings being sort of just the normal on the network. I guess the other thing is social distancing, another turn of phrase that none of us would have used until quite recently. We are managing the network as best as we can to 2 meters social distancing at the moment, and clearly that has very significant impacts upon the number of people that we are able to carry whilst maintaining that level of social distancing. It varies depending upon vehicle layout, but it means that roughly speaking, we can transport around about 15% of our normal capacity. And that's why encouraging those who don't need to travel to continue to stay at home is so important, because you know, even at 100% of our normal service, the amount of passengers that we will be able to transport is severely constrained. Obviously, that's a really difficult thing to manage, and it's incredibly challenging in some locations. So, for instance, as people board and alight from vehicles, it's very difficult. In some of the passageways within the network, that'll be very difficult. And in sort of locations like lifts, again, it's very difficult to manage and enforce. And I think that this is an area where, you know, we as the operator have a responsibility to try to manage the network in that way. Our customers have a personal responsibility as well to behave in a way that enables that social distancing to happen. And that might necessitate them thinking about the way that they travel, so not traveling at all, changing the time that they travel, or actually choosing not to board a particular service if they don't feel comfortable in doing so. We're making changes on the network to try to help with that, but there is an element of personal responsibility as well. Again, we are mindful that the government is reviewing social distancing guidelines, and clearly we will adapt if changes are made to that. I guess people will hopefully notice that we've enhanced our cleaning regime, and clearly that will remain in place. You know, that involves sort of moving to sort of hospital grade disinfectants and cleaning agents that both sort of kill the vast majority of sort of bacteria and viruses across the network, but also sort of act as a preventative measure for sort of many days afterwards. And that's sort of something which we will continue to keep up, and alongside of that sort of a heightened regime of sort of cleaning sort of frequently touched surfaces. But again, in a mass transit system, you know, you are in an environment where you have a large number of people, and in some parts of the network, those people have to balance the risk of not touching a surface with the risk of touching that surface. So clearly, holding a handrail, moving around a vehicle, or when boarding a vehicle, you know, holding onto a handrail when you are climbing either up or down a set of stairs or escalators is something which, you know, again, people need to do, and hence why the ongoing advice around, you know, washing hands thoroughly before and after traveling on the network is so important. And it's also why we've put in over 500 hand sanitizing units across the network as well. So we're in a position where we now have hand sanitizers in all of our ticket halls, and in sort of our sort of major bus stations as well. We will continue to monitor how those facilities are being used, sort of spot when sort of demand requires us to revisit this and potentially put in more of those facilities as well. In terms of like where the challenges are going to be, as I've said, up until now, what we've seen is a gradual increase in demand across the network. But in the next few weeks, we'll increasingly sort of hit that tipping point where we've filled up the available capacity, given that we've got to sort of manage to the 2 metre social distancing. Again, that's going to be in specific locations at specific times. Across the vast majority of the network and across the vast majority of the day, there continues to be ample capacity on the network for people to travel. But there will be a growing number of locations where we have to put in place sort of plans to manage crowding, which will involve potentially holding people at the entrances to our stations, potentially sort of at gate lines, in order to sort of ensure that we don't get too many people within the station environment. It also requires us potentially at some point in the future to think about non-stopping trains, so that again, we're not in a position where we have sort of too many people getting onto a train. And what we've done is sort of worked through all of our hotspot locations and those locations that we anticipate may become more busy, to just sort of think about how we would go about doing that, sort of at which stations make the most sense to skip, so that again, we're not sort of unduly disadvantaging other customers who are waiting in other parts of the network. And also we're not in a position where we are frequently not allowing a customer to alight from a train where they'd want to be. But I think, again, there's this, a realization that customers will have to have, and an expectation that we need to provide to customers, that sometimes, in order to maintain the safety of the network, we're going to inconvenience them more than they have been in the past. When it comes to how are we going to manage around sort of some of our stations, so we're putting in place barriers to sort of facilitate queuing. We have brought in some external stewards to assist at the busiest locations. We're working very closely with the British Transport Police, and have been sort of throughout the last few months, certainly at those busiest of stations in the east of London, to just ensure that social distancing is maintained as best as we can. We also have our own enforcement officers out on the network assisting with this, and we'll sort of look to sort of bring in ambassadors and volunteers, sort of firstly from our own head office staff, but also sort of working with volunteers sort of provided through the GLA and also the DFT if that is required. But again, across the vast majority of the network at the moment, we haven't had to sort of move towards that. In anticipation of it all, our sort of station managers have refreshed all of their sort of station crowding plans, just to make sure that they're familiar with all of those and how they might need to work differently, given that I guess it's sort of worthwhile saying that managing large crowds is not something that's new to us. It's sort of actually part of the core skill set. I guess it's just recognizing where there are the differences here. And so there's been a lot of effort on trying to sort of focus in on that. What else? So I think that's a watching brief. It's also all of that work is supported by a very extensive communications package as well. And I think sort of increasingly important for us to realise that there isn't sort of a single location that this information needs to be provided. It needs to be sort of shared extensively through sort of social media, our website, through direct emails to customers, through advertising on our network, through advertising off of our network as well, whether that's in the press or radio or potentially even TV in the future, just to make it very clear what the plans are. So moving on to other challenges, I guess we're very mindful of the fact that whilst these changes to the way that we operate are required in order to operate a safe network. These changes have the potential to put in place even further barriers to people who already find it difficult to make use of the transport network. We're still operating a turn up and go service on the tube network. However, we have had to make some changes to that, where a member of staff would potentially have to come within 2 meters to support the customer. In some places, we can still sort of work around that. So if a customer is happy to be sort of guided to a lift, for example, but then travel in that lift by themselves and then be met by the member of staff at the bottom of the lift again, we can continue with that. But where that just isn't feasible, for example, if a customer is blind or has sort of difficulties with their vision, we might choose to just use a taxi service instead. And that's been sort of communicated extensively to our operational staff as well, just to ensure that all Londoners are able to continue to make the journeys that they need to across London. And I guess the last thing that I'd sort of pick up on is just the fact that, a major challenge will be just managing the uncertainty. Obviously the government continues to take decisions around the easing of lockdown, but they have various tests that they have to meet that may affect the timing of those changes and the extent of those changes. Even when those changes come in, to an extent, it's a degree of guesswork as to how passengers and our customers will respond to those. As I said, up until now, we've seen a gradual return, but that's not guaranteed moving forward. That could change. It does make it incredibly important that we continue our work with the variety of stakeholders that we sort of stay in touch with on a weekly basis, just to sort of understand how other sectors of the economy are foreseeing a return to something approaching the way that things operated before the pandemic, just so that we've got the best intelligence as possible to ensure that we're in a position to support the recovery overall. I think I'll leave it there. I apologise that was a long sort of introduction, but a lot's happened. So hopefully that's sort of helpful background.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful just to have that background. And as you say, a huge amount has been going on. There's been a lot of adaptation day by day, I'm sure. So a very useful introduction. Thanks for that, Mark. I will open up to board members to ask questions. Just for anybody watching, members of the public, you can email a question through to info@londontravelwatch.org.uk, or you can use the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag LTWboard, and you can get through a question on that. Also, we've got the @LondonTravelWatch Twitter account as well. So if anybody has questions, please feed them through. But I just wanted to start off with board members, if there's anybody who wants to particularly raise a question on the back of Mark's introduction. Jackie, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That was pretty comprehensive, and you preempted quite a lot of the things that we would have asked you about. And I particularly wanted to ask something around the issue of face coverings. I've been, well, I was on a bus yesterday after it became compulsory, and I was on a bus on Sunday before it was compulsory. And I read this morning that the mayor is reported as having said it's likely to be compulsory for the next year. So in that sense, it will become the new normal, to use that horrible phrase. And I know it's really early days, perhaps, for you to say what you so far have been the challenges of enforcement, but what do you think in your scenario planning are likely to be the challenges of enforcement, particularly if it is likely to go on for a very long period of time? Or do you think that after a couple of months, everyone will just get used to it and there won't be any problems with enforcement?
So I guess this is an area where we've tried to learn as much as we can from transport operators around the globe. So we're a member of a variety of different sort of international public transport organisations, some of whom have been dealing with this for you know, either a month or sort of 6 weeks longer than we have. I guess what their experience suggests is that this becomes established as you say, a new normal quite quickly, and that actually compliance rates sort of across the world have been very high. I guess it's worthwhile saying that in some of those locations, there was already a culture of wearing face coverings at various times. Certainly in some Asian countries that has been the case, but across much of Europe and sort of parts of other parts of the world as well, we've seen just a radical sort of shift to this becoming sort of accepted behaviour. I think in the very short term, one of the challenges will just be around that, you know, alleviating any concern that those people who can't wear a face covering for whatever reason don't feel uncomfortable about travelling on the network. And one of the things which we are sort of keeping an eye on over the next sort of few days and weeks is, do we need to do something further to, you know, explain that to people? Either, you know, more information so that a person's comfortable in making the right decisions for themselves, or do we need to do more to make it clear to other passengers why somebody mightn't be wearing a face covering on you know, on their bus or on the tube network? You know, in the past, we've sort of got experience of using things like a travel assist card. You know, we've got the please offer me a seat badge. So there are ways that you could help with that, but they come with advantages and disadvantages as well. And certainly, I don't think it's uniformly clear what the right answer is at the moment. So we've sort of taken a view of just trying to sort of see how things go for a little while before we sort of jump to a conclusion as to what the right answer is here. You know, I think that, you know, we're mindful of the fact that for some people who suffer from hearing difficulties, that lip reading is an important you know, part of the way that they get around the city, and we know that our own staff in customer facing areas will be wearing face coverings as well, so that will add challenges. So there are a few sort of like cases where we're aware of things, but you know, I think sort of based upon experience that we've seen elsewhere so far, we sort of hope that people will just adopt the face coverings and will sort of, you know, establish that as a new behaviour that you have when you travel on the tube or on the bus network.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Alan, did you want to follow up on any of that, or ask it?
I would, please. It's good to see you again, Mark. I've been approached by a number of people on this face coverings issue. And the messages that I'm getting a variety of messages, one of which is around the messages that TfL is sending out. So definitely promoting the use of face coverings, but not promoting the exceptions, so people that can't wear them. And particularly things like, I note that the examples that you're referring to are on the London Assembly website, not on the TfL website. There are concerns that people are raising with me around peer policing. So not so much staff questioning non-wearing, but other passengers. So I think there's a definite feeling that we'd like to see more promotion of that message, particularly in stations and at bus stops. And perhaps you could comment on what you're doing in terms of in-station messaging. And the final point that people have raised with me really is what justification are you planning on requiring for people to not wear these masks? So you mentioned the Please Offer Me a Seat badge as a comparative example. I think it's really important that it's stressed that any card or badge is a voluntary scheme. It's not a mandatory scheme.
Great, thank you, Alan. Good to see you as well. So I think I've got all of those, but if I don't answer one of them, please just give me a nudge at the end. So all of our effort really up until now has been placed on predominantly pushing that, the change that's coming to the network is that it's mandatory to wear face coverings. Relatively speaking, the sort of the change in policy around this happened relatively recently, and I guess in terms of trying to get the message across to the broadest number of people as quickly as possible with the greatest emphasis, it's fair to say that the bulk of our communication has been around just making it very simple that from yesterday it was mandatory to wear a face covering, where it was mandatory and what the face covering had to be. So as that message lands, we will be in a position to sort of change the balance of what we're talking about and talk more extensively about who might not be in a position to wear face coverings. What we have done is on the posters that we have up within our stations or in sort of PAs and in any of the social media and sort of press marketing that we've done is to sort of direct people to our website for further information. And then as you point out, Alan, once you get there, we talk about face coverings, but then we do link through to other sources for what are the potential exemptions. And that's deliberate because certainly in the lead up to the introduction, the exemptions list was changing quite frequently. And it isn't our list of exemptions. I guess what we are very much being guided by here is what the government policy is on this. So rather than be in a position where we put some information on our website and that information becomes out of date because of a change elsewhere, we want people to be able to link through and get the information directly from source. So that's been the approach that we've taken to date. We will see how that goes, and clearly, if that's not working, we can look at making some changes to that. The idea of sort of peer enforcement is something which we're conscious of and why we are considering what some of these other alternatives might be. But again, given that we're sort of 24 hours into this, we don't want to rush to the wrong solution, because taking the Please Offer Me a Seat badge as an example, that was a scheme which has been really successful, but it's also a scheme that had many different viewpoints as we sort of went through the consultation process around it. And many people spoke out about the positives that sort of a scheme might have, but also cautioned that it wasn't right for everybody and that there might be sort of unintended consequences associated with it. So we just want to give ourselves a little bit of time to observe what the problem is that we're trying to solve so that we can come up with the right solution to it. If we were to look at the introduction of a card, or supporting a pre-existing scheme, there are schemes out there for hidden disabilities that you could sort of promote off the back of, number of different ways of doing this. I think absolutely, Alan, we would not be in a position where we would force anybody to demonstrate to Transport for London the reason why they didn't need to wear a face covering. We have seen both with Baby on Board badges and also with Please Offer Me a Seat that the vast majority of people are absolutely honest when it comes to requesting these sorts of badges, and we would expect the same with anything that we did in this area as well. I think I've covered everything. Alan, was there anything else?
I think that's pretty much that set of questions. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Laura, you've got your hand up.
I do, thank you, and thank you for everything you've covered so far, Mark. It's extremely thorough. It was just a quick question about the night tube. It came up in a couple of conversations this week, both in terms of restarting some of the nighttime economy in due course, but also in terms of key workers and their ability to travel on tube overnight. Do you know what the time frames under consideration are for the night tube at this stage?
So at this stage, there isn't a time frame under consideration. What we will continue to do is just sort of look to see how things change over the coming weeks and months. It certainly doesn't feel imminent at this stage, but no, there isn't even a sort of a planning date at this juncture.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask, Mark, and thanks for covering so much ground in your presentation. It's really useful. I just wonder on this 2 meter rule. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about it. At some stage, it may change. But first of all, how much notice do you need really to make the changes? Because I realise there's a lot of signage and announcements being made around 2 meters, and I'm sure there's a lot of training of your staff. So, how much notice do you need to be able to do this sensibly? And also, perhaps related to that, if we carry on with 2 meters, and you talked about the potential for growing queues, obviously as people do return to work, have you got any projections as to how long it is sustainable to keep a queue manageable at 2 meters once you get up to whatever it is, 30%, 40% capacity? Has that been judged? Are you able to say anything about that? Because that's going to be a key driver in one sense. When does it become unsafe at 2 meters? And I know there is the challenge of making sure that people feel confident that they are safe. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So as for how much notice, well, the more notice, the better. However, as we've sort of seen in the last little while, we're pretty good at managing with sort of limited notice. I guess what we have started to do as it's become sort of clear that circumstances are likely to change, in some parts of the network, what we have done is put up social distance markings, things which are more permanent, that don't specifically reference 2 meters, that talk more generically about the need to distance. And then what we have done alongside that is to support the 2 meters with either audio announcements or with posters or materials which are much easier and cheaper to sort of change over. In order to get to, we would be in a position to make a change, within sort of, a week or so. I guess what that would, recognise is that there will be some parts of the network that would progressively need to sort of update their signage. So, we could, make those quick changes, over the course of a week to public address systems, to posters around the network, whether that be within tube stations or at bus shelters and at bus stops. But then there would need to be a program that would probably take several weeks in order to go around and change those other markings across the system. So you would exist in a slightly hybrid state for a while, but I think it would be manageable to do that. But obviously we're not the only sort of industry sector that this will affect. Clearly, whether that's retail, whether that's sort of the leisure industries, are also adhering to, well, certainly retail at the moment are adhering to sort of 2 meters. Everybody will need time to adapt their operating models to any change in that. So, I would expect that there would be a degree of consideration given to that by the government as that policy assessment sort of comes in. In terms of sort of when does it become a problem if we continue with 2 meters? it's hard to know, simply because it depends upon the rate at which people continue to increase their travel, and there are just so many variables there. I guess what we anticipate is that sort of towards the end of this month, towards the middle of July, we will sort of start to reach a sort of a point where some stations across the network will be at their sort of their new capacity for short periods throughout the day, and that we will be likely to sort of need to put in place some type of queue management, sort of either within sort of stations or out onto the public footpath. And we are sort of in conversations with local authorities and the police about how those queues could be sort of both managed and sort of ensure that there's sort of no risk to public safety about that sort of queuing. I guess what we have seen historically, though, is that people are very good at adapting their own behaviour when things start to reach a point which isn't manageable. So actually, rather than anticipating that a queue outside a particular station will get so long that it will become unmanageable, what we have seen historically is that people see how long the queue is and they say, well, I'm not lining up here, I'm going to try something else. And that might be they go back home again, or they walk, or they try a different mode of transport. So I think it will be unlikely that we would reach a stage where that becomes the limiting factor in the way that we're managing the system.
All right, thank you, Mark, for that. There is just an issue about how you decide which stations open and which don't. Clearly, there are some quite quiet stations that seem to open, and whereas there's some pretty busy ones that are still closed. And Anthony, I don't know whether I can bring you in on this, because I think you've actually seen direct evidence of this. But
Yes, hi. Hello, Mark. It's Anthony Smith, Chief Executive at Transport Focus. Good to see you again. Very quick question. What's the rationale behind stations like Clapham South and Bermondsey still being shut, whilst relatively quieter stations are open? Thank you.
So a variety of things at play in trying to work out which stations to keep open and closed. The starting point being trying to keep as many stations open as possible. Then we have looked at things like the locations around those stations that they support. So clearly trying to ensure that stations which are supporting hospitals and other sort of critical facilities sort of stay open. We also then look at stations which facilitate interchange as being important on the network. We then look at sort of the critical facilities that are required sort of within the station, so where a lift is sort of operating and where we need to have staff present, and we then sort of need to move people around, and then we look at demand across the network as well. And then we've taken into account the specific absentee rates that we've observed in certain parts of the network as well. So there isn't sort of like a formula that goes into it. And I must admit, specifically why the decision was taken for those sort of stations around the Claphams, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can come back to you with an answer for what the rationale for those specifically were.
That would be useful, Mark, if we can come back to that, because I realise these things are complex, but I think for the public, they'll sometimes think we don't understand why a quiet station is open and a busy one not. But if you can come back on that, that would be really helpful.
I think it's worth also noting that we are gradually opening up stations across the network as well. So I think we were at sort of 30 as part of planned closures. We're sort of back to sort of 25, a couple of those stations like Bermondsey, still sort of restricted hours and days, but gradually as we sort of see more of our operational staff coming back to work, we're in a position to open up more of the network. So that will continue over the coming weeks.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for that. Mark, we do have a question, a specific question from the public through Twitter, so perhaps I can put this to you. It's regarding the danger of sort of moving it to a car-led recovery rather than public transport and walking and cycling recovery. And the suggestion comes from a member of the public: could we turn the bus lanes into 24/7 bus and bike lanes? Can we turn the single red lines into double red lines? And perhaps in terms of charging for every free parking bay on the red bus network. Any thoughts around that? What can actually be done to make sure we don't go too far over towards the car-led recovery? Does there need to be some deterrent?
Yeah, well, I think these are some of the things which we are looking at and sort of considering. And now clearly you need to take a balanced view in sort of some of these measures as well. Clearly, a degree of road traffic remains really important, especially as it's that balance between we're sort of on the one hand sort of encouraging people to sort of be to think very hard about whether they need to personally travel, and if they're not traveling, well then potentially more deliveries need to take place to people's homes, so you've got to facilitate sort of some road movement there. Equally, you've got to give careful consideration to how you enable businesses to continue to operate with loading zones and other things. But alongside working with the boroughs, we are looking at whether or not we should be making changes to bus priority schemes. And that was something that we were looking at prior to this as well, whether or not the level of bus priority was right, and whether or not sort of existing facilities perhaps needed to change their sort of hours of enforcement, or whether there were opportunities to put in more bus priority measures to ensure that sort of bus journey times were higher. And we know that when you put in place sort of bus lanes, that you can facilitate more sort of cycling journeys as well. Although I guess it's sort of something which, as we've sort of pushed both sort of more cycling sort of lanes and sort of bus priority, that those two schemes need to be designed together to make sure that they are mutually supportive, because buses and cyclists can also come into conflict if you don't think very carefully about what the improvements are that you put in place. So I guess sort of you need to look at the specifics of the location, I suppose, but in general terms, we will be considering what the appropriate use of that road space is, and that could involve making changes to how it's used currently. But yeah, it's I'm sure as all of you have sort of know through experience and casework that you've sort of looked at, it always comes down to the specifics of a location, because every part of London's a little bit different.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mark. I know there's been discussions about Journey Planner, Mark. I think you've had discussions with colleagues, particularly Emma. I don't know, Emma, if you want to raise anything around that, or I know you've had private discussions.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, aren't we? Mark, I'll pick this up with you again when we meet later in the week about the inadequacies of Journey Planner. But also, I got a question just kind of following on from Laura Osborne's around the nighttime economy. So, numbers of people have been trickling back to the tubes and buses rather than a big flood. But if, as planned at the moment, that pubs and restaurants start to reopen at the beginning of July, and we see more people going out for leisure reasons, potentially, in the evenings, most likely in the evenings. What's TfL thinking of in terms of how to cope with the numbers of people coming back later at night for those reasons?
Yeah, so I think we will need to sort of monitor to see how demand sort of increases over time. I think certainly our customer research suggests that people are split on how quickly they will come back to that sort of activity, and will sort of do so cautiously to begin with. Clearly, if demand warrants, we will seek to ensure that we're providing enough public transport capacity in the sort of evenings and sort of later into the night. In terms of, again, sort of coming back to sort of night tube sort of travel, sort of extending into sort of those, into the wee small hours on Fridays and Saturdays, I don't expect that that's something which we'll look to do soon. I didn't mention it earlier, but certainly, in order to protect the level of service that we sort of operate on the tube network during the day, we asked night tube operators to volunteer to do daytime shifts, and 75% of night tube drivers did so. So, we're still sort of in a position where we're sort of robbing from one sort of service in order to sort of keep the core operating at the levels that are required. So we just need to maintain that balance. But we know that our role is to help support the recovery in London, and the nighttime economy is a really important part of what makes London a fabulous city. So we need to adapt our services over time to facilitate that recovery in the nighttime economy as well.
Mark, thank you very much. Alan, I just wanted to check, your hand is up, but
yeah, please.
Right, please.
If I can, there's just a couple of quick things I'd like to raise. Mark, so again, I've been approached by a number of people who are affected by this, but all over the network, all over the trains and buses, there are barriers, there are seating blocked off, and all sorts of ways to manage people. People with sight impairments or who are blind are having trouble with these barriers not being friendly to white canes, and not being able to see them on buses, and it's causing some significant apprehension and anxiety, and it's putting people off traveling. So I wondered whether you could comment on whether you're looking at more appropriate sight impairment, empathetic ways of managing these flows. And the other very quick question that occurred to me, something that as a wheelchair user I'm very conscious of, not being able to get on buses because the space is occupied, so my journeys get extended. With people being, with bus passenger numbers restricted, are you expecting people to wait longer to get on a bus? And are there any plans for changes to hopper fares because of that?
Okay. So your first question regarding sort of obstructions and things sort of potentially causing problems for people with vision impairments and sort of others who might have sort of challenges moving around the network. Alan, I think it's a valid observation. And, being honest about it, we, when sort of the pandemic sort of came upon us and we had to make some very rapid changes to the network, and I think we did our best, and we tried to put in place sort of changes that helped to protect the safety of the majority of customers on the network. But with more time, we would have done things differently, and we've got that time now to go back and make improvements to the way that we've managed those things, whether that be taping off certain corridors, whether that be putting in place one-way systems, taking various seats out of service. We can make improvements there. I think two things. One, when we were at the sort of the peak of the lockdown, there were so few people traveling that these issues weren't as great, and they become more of a problem when you start to get slightly more congested spaces. The other thing, I'll speak honestly, a lot of this stuff was invisible to me and to others because I haven't been traveling on the network either. And, you know, across a tube network of 270 stations, across a bus network that sort of spans the city, we're having to come back around now and just look at what we've done and to make improvements. And that process has started and it's ongoing, and it's going to take a bit of time, but it is absolutely something that we know that we need to address, because it's part of a broader sort of thing that we need to look at. We need to ensure that the network functions, that it's safe, but the built environment that we have is going to be critical to sort of building confidence in people coming back onto the network, and it needs to work and be convivial. It can't be sterile, it can't not work. So I think perhaps more than ever, sort of thinking about how we sort of present our stations for people to use will be very important. The second one around, with limitations on the number of people being able to get onto buses, will that affect wait times? I think unfortunately the answer in some locations is yes. We are having to limit the number of people getting onto buses, whether that be 20 people getting on a double decker or 15 on sort of some of our single deck buses. And it does mean that if that bus is full, the driver should display a full sign at the front of it, and it will keep on driving past. And hopefully, given the levels of patronage that we're seeing on the network at the moment, that hopefully isn't happening too often, but we know from experience that it is happening in certain locations. And again, it's the same old thing that I've said before. Some locations, at some times, it's much more prevalent. At the moment, we're not in a position to run more service. We don't have the drivers to do that, even if we wanted to. Obviously, we also need to balance the cost of running more services against the provision and then the customer benefit that provides. But yeah, I think it's one of those new expectations that we need to make clear to customers, that on occasions they might have to wait longer. But I think it does, Alan, make it really important that we re-emphasise the purpose of the wheelchair space and ensure that that's being used appropriately.
Thank you. I wasn't. It wasn't the wheelchair space I was particularly concerned about. Now, I think just to support what you said about early on changes being made to expedite things, and I think the concern is, as you picked up on, is to go back and revisit those decisions about methods and routes of blocking, and just make sure that they're appropriate. The other question I was going to ask is, have you done any thinking about additional training for an audible guiding rather than tactile guiding? So are there options for maintaining that social distance by other ways of guiding blind and partially sighted people?
I think you raise a good point and a good suggestion, and something that we can factor into training in the future. To be honest, at the moment, just given where we are with staff absenteeism rates, just given ongoing sort of issues with sort of coronavirus, we've sort of had to pause our staff training simply because we just don't have enough people to sort of take them off the operational shifts at the moment. But what we are doing is looking at how our training programs need to change in the future to reflect the differing circumstances, and I think that's a very good suggestion. So one which we will pick up.
Okay, thanks, Alan, for that. Mark, if you can bear with us for just one more question, if you don't mind. And thanks for we're taking a bit of your extra time from you, but it's been very useful to have the discussion. I just wonder if we can conclude. I know Emma was getting my attention. Just wanted to ask a question, I think, about information to the public. But Emma, over to you.
Oh, hi, Mark. Yeah, I forgot that we had a little bit more extra time. I don't know if you do.
Yep.
Just want to come back to kind of information on the TfL website, which we've talked about a few times over the last few weeks. And I can see that it's been updated in the last day or two with some new information. But I still think that there's more that could be done to specifically kind of thinking about passengers who haven't been on public transport for several weeks, maybe for 12 weeks and are coming back to it, to put all the information in one place. So for example, I noticed that, well, I just stumbled across by accident yesterday that there's now a list of bus routes that are particularly busy, along with the tube lines that are busy, which you'd had up there for some time. And I just wondered whether you could take another look at this and try and make sure that things are all in one place and not kind of hidden in obscure kind of hyperlinks, so that people who haven't been traveling for a while can see it all in one place. Thank you.
Yeah. As you say, I think we've had long discussions about this, and it's an area where, much like the network as a whole, it's we've been making changes to the website on an incremental basis really quickly, and now is a good opportunity to take a step back and make sure that the website is fit for purpose for this next phase of people returning, as you sort of highlighted. So sort of following our discussion, our web team is just taking a more holistic look at the website and just making sure that it's fit for purpose, because what we've done at the moment is we've adapted the standard website in order to provide some more information, but looking to certainly the medium term, TfL's going to be promoting some different things. So making sure that not only are we making it clear what changes have happened to the network, but are we giving sufficient prominence to walking and cycling? Are we highlighting the changes that have happened to infrastructure in that part of the network? All of the information that we need to provide alongside that, as you've highlighted, what is it like if you haven't travelled for a while, needs to be improved. And so we are looking to do a more substantive improvement to the website in the not too distant future. I don't have a time frame for that, but I guess we do recognise that it needs to happen quickly, because that's when people are starting to come back.
Thanks very much, Mark, for that. And I think you'll agree some good issues have been raised today, and I think we can take some of those away and keep working with you, because as you suggest, this isn't just it's not a sprint by any means. This is going to be going on for some time to come, and it's a fluid situation, I realise, but hopefully with our involvement we can lead to further improvements. So we'll definitely keep that dialogue going, and I know you've been open to our thoughts before, so we'll keep pushing, and I'm sure you'll keep listening. So we'll develop those opportunities and improvements as we go forward. But for now, we'll let you get on with your day job, Mark. I know you've got plenty on your plate. But do, as I said earlier, please take away our thanks to all your colleagues at TfL and the operators that are working so hard at the moment. I think there's been some amazing work done. It often doesn't get mentioned, but we're mentioning it now. Thanks for everything that's been done so far, and of course what's going to be happening in the future. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your time today, and stay well, and talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks very much. Right, we'll draw a close to this this session, if that's okay. Thanks for the questions, some really useful suggestions there. So if we give ourselves 10 minutes through till 12 o'clock, take a break. We'll leave the cameras on. Luke, I assume we'll all be on mute, but you will probably be visible during the break. So just bear that in mind. We're still public, and then we'll get together again at 12 o'clock.
I was just going to say, Arthur, I know you just spoke about the Richard and Susan's paper earlier. Do we need any more of the public session?
We've just got, I think Shahid is going to be joining us.
Of course, yeah, sorry, yeah.
For the finance paper. So it'll be quite short. You're right, Luke, but if we could just do that, and then we'll move into the private session after that.
Yeah, Sorry. Yeah.
Goodbye all. See you later.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for
Thanks
coming
very
on.
much. Really good session. Thank you.
Really
Goodbye.
good to see you. Thanks.
Hi, Shahid.
Welcome, Shahid. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good.
Good.
So, yeah, we're just taking, just got another 3 or 4 minutes, and then people will be back, I'm sure.
Great.
Morning, Shahid.
Morning.
We'll just give ourselves 1 more minute, and then I'm sure everyone will be back with us. I thought it was a good, useful session with Mark. So some good questions, and I think some good information we can follow up on from that. So thanks for the discussion. Okay, well, shall we resume the public session then? Hopefully everyone's had a bit of a break, had a stretch. We've been through a couple of the key papers, but we haven't been through the finance paper yet. So we've got Shahid with us, who's presented the papers to us. So thanks for those, Shahid. So I'll take them as read. But do you want to talk through your report, Shahid?
Of course, thank you. Morning, everybody. Just to say, I think you've seen a draft version of these at the previous board meeting. So just these numbers are now being finalised. They are awaiting audit, which we have penciled in for September. I think, as mentioned on the last board meeting, we've come in pretty much on target. There was a small surplus of £4,000, which will be transferred to reserves, leaving £49,000 as a closing balance. Main thing to note over the course of the year, there was a significant variance to staff costs, which were funded from additional granting aid from the GLA for compensation for the loss of office and redundancy payments. Accommodation costs following the office move were lower than anticipated, and as were IT support costs. And these were used to fund the CRM upgrade during the course of the year. Moving on to the 2021 budget, again, I think these were presented to you at the last board meeting, and they're also approved. Just as a reminder, the total budget for the current year is 1.134 million, which includes a budget reserve of £75,000. So far, we have plans for around about £35,000 of this to be used on replacement IT equipment and the employment of a digital engagement specialist. And we anticipate the cost for the year will be contained within this total budget allocation. And happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any hands up for any questions on Shahid's report? I just wanted to ask one thing myself, Shahid, and before anyone else comes in. Under accommodation, we're talking about the rent-free payment period being spread over the term of the lease.
Yes.
Which has reduced costs in the current year, but was not factored into the budget. Can you just explain that a bit more, what the rent-free payment period is?
Okay, I think when we took on the lease for Europoint, there was a rent-free period. I think from memory it was 6 months. So for 6 months we were not going to pay any rent for the accommodation. I think in the budgets we assumed that we would be able to kind of account for that within the year. However, as an accounting policy, it needs to be spread out over the term of the lease. So it's going to be that rent-free period is spread out over the 5-year term.
I see.
So we take a small portion each year.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now that's helpful. Thanks for that, Shahid. And Laura, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. Hi, Shahid. I just wanted to check, obviously our reserves have gone up a tiny weeks a bit this year. What should our target level be for our reserves? Yeah, what would that usually be?
I'd say, I think I had this question from Emma earlier, well, late last week. I'm not sure what the policy is, but for London Travel Watch, but I'd say that's probably in line with the budget. It's about that much. So it seems comfortable to me to have that kind of reserve.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Yes, I think in the past we've had about 50, and please, Tim's probably got the most knowledge on this history, but other members, please chip in. I think we've generally had a reserve of about 50, but if I'm wrong on that, put me right, please.
No, you're correct on that, Arthur. That's about right.
Okay. So, but anyway, this is not so far out, so we just need to, but clearly we don't want to have too much sitting in reserve. So but there will be uses for this money going forward, certainly. I also just wanted to check in terms of the audit. I think you said, Shahid, that was going to be now in September. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's penciled in for mid-September, assuming we have access to the office to be able to kind of touch invoices and present that information to the auditors. Yeah,
because that was my follow-up, really. We do have to, the only way we can do it is physically to be in office. Is that correct? At some stage, there's no sort of work around that, is there?
Well, I think we need to be able to present the information to the auditors. So it could be a case of we may not need to be present in the offices. We maybe just as long as we can get access to the invoices somehow and present them to the auditors. I think speaking to Sandra last week, it may be an option to remove the invoices from the offices and scan them and send them to the auditors.
Right.
Maybe a workaround.
Okay. Because that may be, if this is going to be ongoing for some time to come, we do need to get these accounts audited. But I'm sure there are ways of working that through. Hopefully. Thank you. Anybody else want to ask Shahid any questions on the report? It's very clear to me, and thanks for keeping it so concise, Shahid. That's good for me. But no one's got any particular questions. Karen.
Yeah, I just interested to see what your predicted budget is for the next year. obviously we're into June now, so these accounts are the close of March. We've moved on for a couple of months. We must be spending more money in some areas and saving money in others. For example, we're not traveling to meetings and things. I think it might be quite helpful to have a look at some more up-to-date information if you have that to hand.
I don't have that to hand. I can say that the total budget for the year was 1.134 million for 2021. The majority of our costs are fixed costs, so in terms of like accommodation and staffing costs, so there may be a small variance, but I don't think there will be a considerable saving in the year.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I would be interested in seeing more financial information on a more regular basis, as we have a longer period between meetings. Potentially the next one we could be 5 or 6 months into the budget period, and therefore if we do encounter any difficulties, our opportunities to adjust that become quite limited, and that's partly how we got into one of the problems previously. So I think I'd maybe like to see monthly
definitely
finance information, if that's possible. Maybe it's something that gets incorporated into Emma's sort of update for us, but certainly I'm concerned about the long gaps and the long delays between financial information.
Okay, that's definitely something we can work at.
Thank
yeah,
you.
I think as Shahid said, these the changes, most of our costs are fixed, but you're absolutely right, Karen. It's about us keeping up to speed with these. So I think this can be done in between meetings by email if need be. Shahid, our accounts are pretty simple compared with many businesses. So I think the updates can be provided just so that we've got a watch on it between meetings, Karen. Yeah.
I think that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Shahid? Okay. Well, thanks, Shahid. Very clear. And as I say, if we can keep in touch on that and just have monthly updates, that'd be really helpful. But that covers the ground for now.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So I think that concludes the public session, unless anybody has anything to raise for now. Okay. So I'd like to move into private session.